The John Robson Program for Business, Public Policy, and Government at Emory University's Goizueta Business School brought together business and government leaders as well as top students for its inaugural annual conference. The program is named for John Robson, who had been dean of the business school as well as the deputy secretary of the U.S. Treasury. A feature of the John Robson program is the opportunity that students are afforded to interact with leaders from the business, government, and nonprofit sector.
The Robson program is really great for me because it allows me to explore my interests in both business and policy. And especially in today's day and age, it's really hard to look at either without seeing the interconnection between them.
We'll begin because I know you're all very busy leaders, and the Admiral's very busy, and it was on TV at 3 o'clock and some other time, so it's been a long day. But I did want to acknowledge some people quickly. With the Robson Program of Business, Public Policy, and Government, so we have leaders from all sectors here. I don't want to take time from the keynote speaker. He's gracious enough to have time for questions, but if the board could stand up and not be so modest. If you kick your shoes off, don't worry, just keep your feet under. And I would like the Robson faculty fellows to stand up. Pamela and Lori and the others, and Ken and Jagdish and Ben. All right, but now I would like to introduce Lieutenant General Ken Keane. It's because of him that we were lucky enough to meet the Admiral, who's a great role model for us. A number of presidents, President Becker, our President Sturck, who was with the Admiral earlier, have seen the Admiral speak at the Aspen Institute, and they were hoping we could get him to Atlanta someday. But it's really his friendship with Lieutenant General Keane that made it happen. So I'd like to have him come forward. He's also a member of the Robson faculty as well as the business school faculty. So let's welcome Lieutenant General Ken Keane.
Well, it would be a distinct pleasure and honor to introduce the Admiral. I want to spend a moment to telling you about some things that if you don't know about Admiral Stavridis, you should know. And if you don't, you can go home tonight and you can check it out. But he obviously an Army career naval officer who graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1976. But the area that he, I think, is most distinguished in, if you read about him, is not the warrior aspects, which is certainly pronounced, but it's the scholarly aspect. He embodies what we would like to call the warrior scholar. And his academic credentials certainly speak for themselves. He was the 16th commander, if I got that right, sir, of the Supreme Allied Commander for Europe, SAC-EUR. Now, somebody thought long and hard about that name. That is a very distinct name in our military, Supreme Allied Commander of Europe. Go look and see who has had that position, leaders in our nation. He was the commander of U.S. Southern Command. He held those two positions a combined of over 7 years, the longest of any other military commander in our nation to hold combatant commands. So, sir, welcome and thank you very much for joining us here tonight.
Yeah, Jeff told me to speak for about 2 hours and 15 minutes. Everybody's pretty comfortable. We can get more wine later. What I thought I would do is take about 30 minutes and just kind of walk through the world and talk a little about global security. We ought to worry about Iran, and we ought to worry about Syria. This is Bashar al-Assad. He is the most dramatically illustrated war criminal in modern history. His activities have personally resulted in the deaths of 600,000 Syrians. He has pushed 14 million Syrians out of their homes, 7 million outside the borders of that extremely tortured nation. And worst of all, this is not an internal Syrian problem because it leads to this: great power engagement. You see the United States and Russia colliding in this region. And what does it all lead to? Waves of refugees. So in addition to our challenges in violent extremism, Iran, North Korea, we ought to worry about Syria and what's happening there as well. Here's something you probably haven't thought about. Every 100 to 200 years, a pandemic comes along. Despite all of our improvements in medicine. And 6 miles from here at the CDC, believe me, they are thinking about pandemics like Ebola, the top, upper right, patient 0, died in a Dallas hospital, bottom Zika. These are very dangerous organisms. We are one twist of the DNA away from these kind of diseases being able to be transmitted across an air gap. When that occurs, folks, we're back. We are back. Good sneeze, perfectly timed. We are back in 1918. And we ought to be ready for that in the same way, if not more so, than we are ready for the challenges we face in, if you will, traditional security. Long term, what do I worry about? It's the environment. Global warming, here's a news flash. Global warming is real. This is not fake science. And I'll tell you that not as someone who is an oceanographer or a physicist or has deeply studied the weather patterns of the world. I'm a mariner. I spent much of my life on the oceans of the world. I will tell you as a fact, the ice is melting. And we could have a debate, I guess, about why that's occurring. But the point is, the geopolitical challenge of that is enormous in the Arctic. And more importantly, in the 50 to 100-year future, the warming challenge of photosynthesis in the sea is existential. With all respect to Al Gore, who often said that the Amazon are the lungs of the earth. They're not. The oceans are the lungs of the earth. The thing that really worried me and continues to worry me is cyber. Cyber, our weakness. Why? Because in cyber, we have the greatest mismatch between level of threat, very high, level of preparation, very low. Every other thing I've talked about tonight, threatening, concerning, but we're preparing, we're working on it. Even the environment, we have the Paris Accords. Only one nation is outside those. Who is that? I forget. That's why we have elections. We'll be back in the Paris agreements before it's over, believe me. But in cyber, we're not ready. So right about now, you ought to be saying, okay, Admiral, I'm worried. There are a lot of challenges out there. So what should we be doing about it? What do you think? And are there opportunities for leaders to address these kind of issues? I think there are. So I'm going to start with the number one thing we could do to create security for the United States. And right now you're picturing an image and you're thinking, okay, the next picture will be an aircraft carrier coming right at me. Nope. The number one thing we could do to create security is right there. We could listen better.
I know you speak Spanish and French, which is very useful in Francophone Africa, amongst other places.
Right.
And you were head of Southern Command, which is all of Latin America as well as Caribbean. If a parent here, as a number of people here are parents of young children or grandparents of young children, what two languages would you have them study, or is too many languages?
No, I'd say for any American today, there's an obvious first choice, and that's Spanish. I mean, let's be clear. Today, 15% of our population speaks Spanish as a first or second language. And by mid-century, that number will be 30%. We're well on our way to being a bilingual, bicultural country. That will strengthen us, in my view. So I think Spanish is the starter language for anybody in the United States. Secondly, you get into a world of choice. I continue to believe, although it's quote, traditional, but I think French still is a very international language. It's spoken throughout much of sub-Saharan Africa. It's highly useful in and around many countries as a second language. And it's just easier to learn for an American who, particularly one who speaks Spanish. It's an easy transition to learn French. They're all based on Latin. And it is, I think, a good investment compared to the difficulty of learning Mandarin, Arabic, or Russian, which would probably be the next three that I would really think about.
What were you willing to say about our friends?
Yeah.
Of China?
Yeah, I often think to myself as I do this presentation and I talk about Iran and North Korea and Russia and Syria, if I ought to include China as a potential opponent. And I think very consciously about that. And I've gone back and forth over time. My conclusion is that we should not think of China as an opponent yet. And to unpackage that, I'd recommend for anybody here, if you're really interested in what the president is talking about, read Destined for War, title of the book by Graham Allison. There's no question mark at the end of that. It's by Graham Allison, Destined for War, U.S., China, 21st Century. His thesis is that in history, going back 3,000 years, when an established power confronts a rising power, 80% of the time they go to war. Be that Athens and Sparta 2,500 years ago, or Great Britain and Germany 100 years ago. So the odds are against us. Here's the good news. Neither the United States nor China are pushing an ideology. The Chinese are not trying to convince us to be communists, and frankly, we're not trying to convince the Chinese to be libertarians or Democrats. I mean, there's some fringe elements in both countries who might want to do that, but not really. So there's not that kind of ideological distinction. The closest we come to real conflict, and you already said it, is three words, South China Sea, because this is a huge pot of hydrocarbons about the size of the Gulf of Mexico that China claims in its entirety. This would be as though the United States simply claimed as a matter of territorial sovereignty the Gulf of Mexico. That, I won't say will drive us to war, but that will move us quickly on the scale of conflict. So we need to address that. We need to address that in international legal terms. We need to address that operationally by challenging China. China will push back operationally. But I think we can steer through that without going into a full-blown war.
In the morning, we will have a speaker, Lado Gurganidze, who was Prime Minister of Republic of Georgia, also has started numerous very successful businesses. And remember, it's the Robson Program of business, public policy and government, which is also why Frank Blake will speak tomorrow, the very successful head of Home Depot, and most people don't know, Deputy Secretary of Energy as well, a clerk at the Supreme Court. And we'll have David Abney, head of UPS, and someone who knows about those 2.4 billion people who use Facebook and the privacy issue. Adam Getty will be speaking in the morning. So what I'm really saying is, those of you who RSVP'd to come tonight, you did the right thing. You've met the Admiral, you've learned from the greatest speaker and one of the greatest persons I know. But if you didn't RSVP for tomorrow, you made a mistake. And you know that now because the Admiral has shown the quality that we're trying to bring to the Robson program. Admiral, I admire you, and I also think you have a wonderful family.
Thank you.
And I wish you the best in all you do. And Dr. Wong, I'm so glad they let you off emergency duty at the emergency room, because it's an honor to have you here, and you serve the country, as the Admiral said as well. So thank you very much. I'd like to thank everyone for coming to the inaugural annual conference of the Robson Program for Business, Public Policy, and Government. We have a very exciting program, starting with someone who fits that bill perfectly, business, public policy, and government, as you'll see in the first speaker. I did want to say one thing about the program. I don't want to cut into his time, but John Robson is a person who fully embodied the point of this program that we have at Guzweda Business School that I'm fortunate to direct. John Robson was a very successful lawyer. He went to Yale and then Harvard Law School. He worked at the Department of Transportation. Many people see him as the father of airline deregulation. Otherwise, we used to pay huge prices for airlines, and it was fixed. There was no opportunity for competition. People would not have the opportunity to go to Europe, for instance, unless they were very wealthy. Then he became ultimately the CEO of a major firm, G.D. Searle. They came up with NutraSweet. They sold it to Monsanto very successfully. But John felt that a life well lived, you would be contributing in different sectors. So he wanted to contribute in the academic sector. He had that wonderful education and intellect. So he came to Emory University as our dean. He hired myself, Ben Kaczynski, who's here, Rob Kazanjian, Julie Barefoot, and I hope I didn't miss anybody. If I did, see me at the break. But he really got the school moving, and I feel like the momentum we have, it all started when John Robson became dean. He only stayed with us for a few years. I think I was in his office, and the first President Bush called and said, "John, I need you in Washington. We need you to be Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Treasury, to really be its CEO and COO and run it." And he had promised me and others he would be there about 7 years, build the school. Said, "Jeff, I got to leave, got to go to Washington." I'm like, "You promised 7 years." And he said, "My president is calling and saying you have to serve your nation." I said, "Sir, that beats your promise to me. I'll help you pack." So he just had a wonderful career and a very wonderful, warm person as well. Fortunately, Julie Barefoot and myself and others became friends of the family. Doug Robson, their son, is younger than I am, but was at Yale and a tennis champion as well as a brilliant writer, etc. So it's very warm to reunite in some sense. But speaking of reuniting, there's a man that I'm so proud of. Those of you who are parents or teachers, it's your fondest goal for your kids or your students to far exceed you. You don't feel badly about yourself. You feel like that's why we do what we do. And in my case, I think one of the things, or probably, no, the thing I think I'm most proud of as a teacher, which is really what I am at core, is Lotto Gurganidze. Lotto, I think, was our youngest MBA ever. Usually you wait for people to have years of experience so they have maturity. Lotto was very mature, brilliant, I think we heard about him at the level of presidents and prime ministers. He came, Julie, I think you, amongst others, helped recruit him. I was very fortunate to become his mentor, but in the kind of inversion, like I say, you hope for. He's now my mentor. If I want to know anything about finance or what is it like to run a government, okay, I hear about blockchain, what's really going on, how do you take a broken bank and fix it? I turned to Lotto, and I think because I was a mentor to him, he's always very kind, teaching me things, giving me useful advice. But anyway, as you know from his bio, Lotto Gurgenidze was Prime Minister of Republic of Georgia. He moved them from in the hundreds in terms of ease of doing business into the single digits. He made Georgia actually an exemplar for other nations in Eastern and Central Europe as to how to clean up an economy, deregulate it, attract foreign investment. Then in places like Rwanda and others, they've turned to him for advice. And as you can see, he's still a young man, even though he's turned around a few banks, grown them, listed on the London Stock Exchange. He was into cryptocurrencies before cryptocurrencies were cool, which shows, I think, his vision. And he's now running some companies. He's on the board of a number of unicorns in the tech space, particularly in fintech, and that's where we'll start. So first of all, I think anyone associated with Emory, as many of you are, we're all so proud of Lotto. I'm also pleased, Lotto, to call you my friend. You graduated from being my student a long time ago. So let's welcome Prime Minister Lotto Gurgenidze.
Thank you. What is fintech? I mean, it's really just a sort of kind of trendy way of probably saying the following, right? There are many verticals of the financial services in general which had been left undisrupted, or where the practices, I mean, the technology may have changed, obviously, right? We've all been using computers and such for decades, but fundamentally, many of the verticals of the financial services had been undisrupted for decades, up until probably a few years ago, right? And when this, I don't want to call it a revolution, but when this trend started, really, various talented entrepreneurs, right, either coming mostly from the tech world, and that's probably more prevalent in the US, the sort of fintechs here are usually, not always, but usually started and founded by the tech entrepreneurs, or by ex-bankers, which is kind of the more prevalent trend in Europe. I mean, all these guys have started chipping away and experimenting and playing with certain either verticals in the financial services. I mean, let's name some of them, for instance, right? I mean, there's some very interesting work going on in wealth and savings. The point I'm trying to make, so look, are they going to help change things? Yes, right? Are they going to conquer the world? In a way, yes, because they're solving a real problem that a lot of people, right, who are not very happy with paying $45, you know, for a SWIFT transfer, right, as a retail customer, they do appreciate their existence, right? Obviously, that's putting pressure on the established players in the market. Obviously, other people are trying to find ways of executing international transfers more cheaply, right? So what's going to result from all this in that particular space of international payments is less friction for the consumer, more choice, or better value or whatnot. But it's not going to obviously sort of decimate the payments franchise of the established banking players, right? So that's what I'm saying, right? Over this one decade, the paradigm has shifted because the enabling technologies have shifted, right? So and you know, when you have done that, when you've acquired 250,000 customers for a few million euros or dollars, doesn't matter. I mean, what does that tell you is that in places like Africa, right, customer acquisition still comes very cheap if you know what you're doing, right? It's a proper institution. I mean, the Ghanaians never knew what hit them, right? Then last summer, we had like a generational change of the local CEO, and I was just surprised because the CEOs of all the Western brand names in Ghana, right? Like Barclays Ghana, Standard Chartered Ghana, whatever. They all wanted to come. It wasn't even a lateral. It was actually like half a step below, because they've never seen anything like that, right? So that's kind of the power of fintech or the technology if you do it in the right way, and it does work arguably even better in places where the competition is maybe not particularly agile or particularly attuned to the modern ways, right? So that's kind of the African journey over just 1 decade, and who knows where it's going to be in another 10 years, right? But no, it's just growing and developing by leaps and bounds. There's dozens and dozens of small sovereign countries that, unlike my own, do not have a perpetual geopolitical risk on their border, or even actually haven't encroached on their territory, right? So, okay, the short answer is no. It's tough being on the Russian border, and it's even tougher when they continue to occupy 20% of your territory, right? So, I mean, the biggest implication that we've always kind of internalized, was that, look, okay, so this, if you will, geopolitical risk is so acute and so permanent in our case, right? That, okay, because unfortunately, probably the reality of it is that joining NATO is probably decades away, even though that's a stated aspiration for, officially stated, of the country, and frankly, every Georgian of a sound mind, frankly, aspires to that, right? But I mean, that's decades away, right? And yet we have this situation where 20% of the country is occupied, and frankly, any day, something worse might happen, right? So it's paramount, right, as a small open economy to just be very investor friendly, right? And if you at the same time are neither part of the EU, which we're not, we only have a sort of deep and comprehensive free trade agreement and a visa-free travel, but we're not an EU country, and again, won't be probably for the foreseeable, 10, 20 years, unfortunately. And if you at the same time have this perpetual geopolitical threat manifested in just the realities of the map, you have to be that much freer, that much better, that much more deregulated, that much more investor friendly, because otherwise, look, if we're no better, if we're no freer as an economy than your average, a Bosnia and Herzegovina, or I don't know, a Lithuania or a Slovakia, what sane investor would want to invest in Georgia, given all the risks that the investor would then inherit and be faced with, right?
Adam Getty, founder and CEO of Ionic Security, a world leader in cybersecurity, discussed the roles that the private and the public sector must play to ensure cybersecurity for all.
What I'm going to do my best to convince everybody here today is that actually what we need to be discussing across policy, across organizations, and amongst ourselves as individuals is the idea of trust. And that within that concept, in the world we live in today, things such as cybersecurity and privacy and the likes fall into that framework. The constructs and primitives by which modern society has evolved to get to where it is today, the two fundamental things that absolutely no longer exist, but are absolutely rigid variables in almost every calculus that is performed, from law to policy to how we interact amongst each other and as individuals or organizations, just don't exist. We no longer live in the world that is loosely coupled, highly proximate, and very tactile. The world that almost all of human history is built around. Almost all of our social constructs depend on. We live in a world today that is so distributed, so interdependent, and almost every day more and more virtual. And really what those things mean is it used to be almost impossible, and actually it really did used to be impossible, for somebody sitting on the other side of the world to wake up that morning and affect the lives of other humans that weren't physically proximate to them that day. We don't live in that world anymore. I believe we are now at a point when it comes to law, when it comes to policy, when it comes to the responsibility of businesses, the responsibility of governments, and the responsibilities of us as individuals, to take into account one really simple thing. We are so dependent on each other. We are so connected as part of that dependency. And we are so susceptible to a very small amount of effort having a very real bad impact on our lives every single day because of it. And we've never lived in a world before where somebody, once again, sitting on the other side of the world, can put a few keystrokes into some little box, and it could affect the lives of millions or tens of millions, or in some cases, hundreds of millions. And that trend is just not going anywhere. Law, how we think about it, policy, how we think about it, organizational constructs and how we think about them, all are going to have to evolve to the world where we are no longer proximate and we no longer rely day in and day out on very tactile assets or interactions. One thing that is not going to change in a progressive way until we reconcile that is the fact that all of this data that does have the opportunity to do good for us, but also at the same time has the opportunity to do some irreconcilable bad things, is still going to be collected and aggregated. It's still going to be centrally placed in multiple organizations' data sets. And that will not change until there is a demand that the incentive structures to do that changes. There will be no reason to. How many individuals in this room would be comfortable not knowing right now, instantaneously, where every penny you have is? Raise your hand if you would be comfortable. Nobody, right? So, quick question. The money you have, sans the money in your pocket and the money under your bank, under your bed at home, is just ones and zeros too. It's just data. Mm-hmm. We obviously have proven to the world at scale and across every jurisdiction, we can tag and track and account for all the digital bits that make up the world's global economy. And we don't break a sweat. So we know it can be done. So that's the first part. This is not an insurmountable problem, technically. So it can be fixed, it can be done. Second, this was not even not even a difficult thing for you to contemplate. It's your money. You want to know where the heck it is and how it's being used. The most critical asset you have other than your people and your customers is the information that your people and your customers produce, the data. Mm-hmm. It is the asset. It is the commodity. It is also the most free-flowing commodity, but it is also the first commodity that we have in all of history of commodities that is easily copied and easily made portable. It is this thing that is no longer required to be proximate to have impact and value, and this thing that is no longer required to be tangible, one thing in one place to have value. So we need to recognize that if we, as individuals, allow for everybody else to reap the rewards of our data, we're losing business value, we're losing monetary value, and we are going to give up our ability to ever get that value back because the commodity markets are really efficient at extracting value. And so if you would like to make change, start thinking about your data as an asset, and you most likely will start thinking about it slightly differently just outright. And then start demanding more of this from your providers of services. And that's ultimately how we're going to make change. There are really interesting ideas and a lot of wide-eyed and bushy-tailed millennials and non-millennials out there and iGens and everybody else that recognize this as an opportunity to change the power curve and invert the power pyramid on this one. And we may see some real change because of it.
David Abney is the chairman and CEO of UPS. Doing business in over 200 nations, David discussed the importance of free trade. David also received the Global Innovation Award from the Goizueta Business School.
We believe a combination of emerging markets and e-commerce, which they're so intertwined, is going to be the largest opportunity that capitalism has ever seen. If that's the case, American businesses, large and small, have to take advantage of those opportunities. We do believe trade agreements is part of it, that if you make trading simpler, if you take delays out, unnecessary border delays and things like that, that will open up a whole new opportunity. And if the U.S. does not participate in the development of these emerging markets, then 20, 30 years down the road, other countries are going to take advantage of that. And a lot of the growth that could be available for U.S. companies could no longer be there. So we see it as concerns, but we see it as a lot of opportunity. And that's why we are growing our network as an incumbent company, and we are. The first thing you can always think is, can we keep things pretty much the same? Because we're very comfortable. We have this large U.S. network. About at one time, 3/4 of our business was business to business. That's now changed to half. You know, about 35% of our business is international. You project that out, it's going to be 50% or more. So you have to make sure that you're looking at it from a disruptor point of view and an opportunity point of view versus an incumbent point of view that says things are pretty good the way they are. Problem is, the world's not stopping. These trends are going to continue, and we have to all change our businesses to take advantage of those opportunities. What we're facing right now, as far as when you start, whether you call it protectionism or you know, a focus on fair trade or whatever, but when things start to escalate between countries, that would be the thing that's the biggest concern, because that can get outside of your control very quickly. And now, if trade moves from one part of the world to the other, we can move our network. But if protectionism or if focus on within the borders of any country, if that starts to spread, then if that reduces global trade, then that certainly has an effect on our network and on our customers' networks. Somehow there's a view, or there can be a view, that the only way I can win, whether I as an individual or a country, is that someone else has got to lose. And the message we're trying to make sure everybody understands, and NAFTA is a great example. We believe North American trade can get much better if we modernize that agreement compared to if it's terminated. We think there's two completely different circumstances there. We think there's a way that Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. can all win and can be stronger in trading with the rest of the world if we have an up-to-date agreement. The biggest thing we've learned is we try to run those parts of the world with people that are from those parts of the world. So we want Africans running Africa and Europeans running Europe and Asians in Asia, because they understand the culture. The biggest mistake you can make as a U.S. company, if it works in New York, it'll work in Johannesburg, you know? And I think we all know that's about the most ridiculous thing in the world. So no one would really believe that. But we can sometimes think we'll just handle things the same way, and you can't. When you work with people that have lived their entire lives in these parts of the world, they can tell you a lot of things that if you listen to them would work to your advantage. I believe that many parts of Africa is going to be a part of that emerging market explosion that I've been talking about. And it's going to create opportunities unlike what they've seen in the past 100 years. So we're really excited about it. Our counsel to the U.S. government or to all countries throughout the world would be, we'd like to see more of these multilateral agreements. Now, we'll take bilateral agreements. Only problem with bilateral agreements, right? You're doing it one country at a time, and they can be different from others, where if we can do a multilateral where all the countries can win, and I believe that Japan and the U.S. have certainly had good discussions, and I would like to see that as an eventual goal. I just don't think it's the next one or two things that's going to, happen on the agenda. I just want to give you one quote, and it's not a quote, it's more of a statement. Anybody heard of Ray Kurzweil? Mm-hmm. He's a futurist that makes some pretty bold statements. He made one at the start of the 21st century that said the 21st century is not going to provide 100 years of progress. It's going to be more like 20,000 years of progress. Now, of course, we all know that mankind has only been on this earth for about 5,000, right? So you see the point that he is making. And what I would want to encourage everyone in this room is with all this progress, if any of us think that status quo, doing things the same as we've been doing, is going to be a plan to success, you couldn't be any further from the truth. We all have to embrace innovation. We have to embrace opportunities. And if someone tells you that's not the way we've ever done it before, that probably means you're looking in the right direction, right? Because we do all have to start doing things that we've never done before. We're not going to be as comfortable in this new world, but if we're willing to take those risks, and if we're willing to listen to our customers and to our employees, then we believe there's great opportunities out there. And we're determined that UPS is going to have the same success in our next 110 years as we did our last 110 years. We're just going to have to be willing to manage the company a completely different way to do that because it's different circumstances.
Jose Cisneros is the treasurer of San Francisco, following top positions at major banks. Jose discussed the unique challenges of holding elective office in a city that combines the wealthy and the poor.
So we know in our office a lot about how to handle money, particularly the city's money. But we wanted to take some of that knowledge and help folks who were not as well off, and particularly who were low income. And one of the things I learned about early on was the plight of somebody who doesn't even have a bank account. It was something I really wasn't aware of, not having really any contact with it. But if someone doesn't have a bank account of any kind, every time that person gets paid, they have nowhere to go but one of these check cashers. Now, in most places in this country, check cashing is perfectly legal, but I'll tell you, the fees they charge end up being a ripoff for anybody that uses them, particularly anybody that uses them their entire lives. Fees that you would pay to a check casher to cash every one of your paychecks, which unbanked people do, can add up to $500, $600, $700 over the course of a year. I'm confident that nobody in this room is paying $700 a year for fees to have a bank account. What our city did was we partnered with local partners and we reached out using the city's voice to encourage people who didn't have a bank account to consider going to get one. Because we knew that just that one simple change, that one step, could make a world of difference to somebody who's only making $10,000 or $20,000 a year. And then I'll leave you with the one program I think that everyone's excited about, which is our Children's Savings Account program. There was a study a few years ago that showed if a child grows up with a college savings account in the child's name, engaging with that account builds aspirations over their childhood. And just having that experience means that child is 5 times more likely to go to college compared to a child who didn't have that force in their upbringing. Well, we know full well that a lot of low-income families will not get around to opening up a college savings account for their children. So we, the city, partnered with our school district, and now each year we open up automatically 4,500 accounts, one for every incoming kindergartner, automatically, no paperwork, no parents' signatures. Every kid starts kindergarten. A few weeks later, we send a letter home that says, welcome to your child's college savings account. Here's your account card. It has your account ID number on it. It's opened up at a local bank. You can go walk right down the street to the bank branch. You can make deposits there. You can mail in deposits. You can do whatever you like. You can go online and check your balance once you started adding money in. And by the way, go do that anyway because we, the city, put the first deposit of $50 into your child's account. Your child already has money saved for their college education. We started this a number of years ago, and to date we've opened over 30,000 accounts for students in the school district. Fully half now of the students have accounts.
And Jose, I feel your enthusiasm. I'm so proud to be your friend. I'm like, and it's been great for myself when you speak to the national groups of treasurers or even mayors in San Francisco, and you've done it in Atlanta. It's a great opportunity to see you. And think about Jose, successful with firms from software to large banks, and with his communication ability, technical ability as an MIT person. I keep saying, Jose, you would do so well if you went back to the private sector. You'd probably be a CEO and on huge corporate boards. And he said, I love my job. And I was thinking, tax collector? But, but we can feel your passion and, a life well lived to help these kids get to college, become viable, keep other people out of just a recidivism of back to, et cetera. Now I see why you love your job.
First and foremost, the one thing that I think people are a little bit surprised by if they come to government after having private sector experiences, everything we do in government is available for everyone in the public to see.
Yeah.
Every communication we make, every conversation we have, every meeting we're in, it's all available. There's this thing called freedom of information requests. There's public records requests. Every single thing we do is all viewable by all of you, by everybody in our city, in our country, anywhere. Imagine if you had that weighing over you every day at the job you have or whatever you do every day of your life. Wow. Every single one of our communications. So it doesn't paralyze us. It's not a reason to not do things, but it's there all the time, and we have to be mindful of it. That's an excellent question. And from my experience, and I've only been there 14, 15 years, so I haven't been there forever, but from my experience, I would not say that elected officials in one particular city are necessarily their strongest skill is partnering with neighboring elected officials. It's not something we're usually rewarded for, in spite of how, like you correctly point out, how absolutely important it is. That being said, I've seen some real leadership in that area. One of the things I've seen time and time again in the Bay Area is at least the mayors of our three largest Bay Area cities, namely San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose, have three very strong mayors, and they oftentimes in the last few number of years would come together and speak together on a topic like homelessness, or transportation. And so I think that's heading in the right direction. A piece of advice I would give, though, and I think I would give this to a Rotary, a Chamber of Commerce, to business leaders of all type, is you guys really are the voices that should keep the pressure on the elected officials to do exactly what you're talking about. To say, stop being so narrowly focused about your one little neighborhood and your voting constituency. Try and be a little more regionally focused, because your businesses rely on it, your employees need it, and your neighbors are only going to become good customers of yours if they're successful. And none of our little cities operate in a vacuum. So I've seen a lot of our Bay Area Council of Companies and other leaders like that in our Chamber of Commerce continue to be very vocal and honestly put pressure on our city leaders to do exactly that, to say, be more broad-minded, be more open-minded, and engage in more regional conversations because they see it as important to them.
Frank Blake was the highly successful CEO of Home Depot. He also had a top role in the Department of Energy and is now the chairman of Delta Airlines and Grady Hospital. Frank discussed the leadership challenges in the business, the government, and the nonprofit sectors.
It is much, much more difficult to lead in the governmental setting than a business setting. And it's that way for a number of reasons. First, in a business, everybody has kind of the same goal. It's we make more money next year than we made this year. That's our goal, and you can orient everyone that way. You have a lot of flexibility on variable compensation. You can hire and fire with a lot of discretion. That doesn't exist in the government. So governmental organizations do not have one unifying purpose. The differences are just multiple. At Home Depot, I would always say the job of management is to absorb complexity up and push simplicity down. So you want things getting simpler, the lower they go, more complex higher up. Government actually runs the other way around. If you think about how Congress legislates, it tends to be very simple up here, and all of the complexities and the nitty-gritty of what you actually do gets resolved at a much lower level. Exactly the reverse. And you can go through item and over item like that and say dramatically different. So it's harder and harder. The skill sets are very different. The ability to get people aligned, the ability to get people to see that the direction you're taking is actually in their self-interest is a key skill set. It matters in business, but it doesn't matter as much as it does in government. Patience is a huge element in government, not so much in business. So I could go down the list, but the governmental experience is much, much more difficult. I think it's hugely important to be thinking about your career as solving a set of problems, and that every problem that you solve is a key to unlocking the opportunity to solve a bigger problem, and that you ought to be thinking about your career as a progression of solving increasingly bigger problems. And when you get frustrated that you're not solving bigger problems, that may be a good time to switch paths, and don't be so worried about switching paths, because I switch paths a lot of times, but if you know what you're doing and you have a notion of bigger problems that you want to solve, it can work out okay. And then as very, very general career advice, the best piece of advice I've ever heard is just thinking of your career as think of your career as a Venn diagram. And I think people tend to, particularly now, maybe overweight the things that they're passionate about, but that's one circle. Here's what I'm passionate about. And then intentionally draw the second circle, which is here are the things I'm good at. At least for myself, I know that that's a very small overlap. The things I love and the things I'm actually good at, that's a small little conjoined circle. And then there's a third circle, which is what will people pay me to do? And that one is smaller still. But think through that, because it will get you. In my case, I talk about, and I say this, I know we've got some lawyers in the audience. I say this with great deference to all lawyers. I am a lawyer, but one of the things, or maybe one of the things that law school does for you is it teaches you how to worry about things that no normal human being would ever worry about. Well, that's actually one of those circles of here's what people will pay me to do. People will pay me to go through details that they think are just too damn stupid for them to worry with. So that's one of your circles. Very often, that thing that people will pay you to do is not something that's hugely exciting. Its value is actually that other people don't find it hugely exciting, but they'll pay you to do it. I said, okay, Jack, boil it down for me. If there's one key characteristic of leadership, what do you think it is? What is that? And his answer was generosity.
Wow.
And that, I sort of went, whoa. I wasn't expecting that. I love Jack. He's a phenomenal person, but that was not the descriptor that I expected. And then when I asked him about it, he said that the reason that is true, and I think this extends beyond leadership and into the life well lived, is that you want to be fueled by the success of others. Right. And that if you can derive energy and excitement and passion through seeing the success of others, that's a life well lived. And you mentioned my wife Liz and her trips to Haiti, which, other than the fact that she may have another family in Haiti, I attribute to partly that.
No, exactly.
That it's fueled by. I see other people making successes or making advances in their life that they wouldn't have made otherwise. And I think if you can generate that kind of fuel in your life and have that as what drives you forward, I think that's a life well lived. I don't know that there's an optimal timing. One of the things that the public sector provides that is different than the private sector is on the political side. So in my case, before becoming Deputy Secretary of Energy, which was later in my career, very early in my career, I was the General Counsel at EPA.
Yeah.
And I had 1,000 lawyers reporting to me. At that age, I mean, I say this with no implied criticism of the country, but no one in their right minds would have put me at that age in charge of 1,000 lawyers. But you get to do something like that because that's sort of how the political process works. You work on a campaign, your candidate's successful, they look around, they say, okay, who can plug this job? And they, oh, Frank, okay, go over here. What are Frank's I mean, no one really stops and goes, what are Frank's qualifications? Does he run anything? No, great, he's general counsel. So you can actually gather experience and learn, and also because you have this cadre of great, committed, hardworking civil servants who are going, oh my gosh, now we got to train this stupid kid. You do have that opportunity, and the government gives you that opportunity that you might not otherwise have. Yeah.